19. Boyd H. Bode. Is Progressivism a new absolutism? Boyd Henry Bode, born 1873, for many years Professor of Education at Ohio State University, was, with Kilpatrick, often identified as one of the two great followers of John Dewey in education. But a markedly different spirit sets off Bode from Dewey and Kilpatrick, however marked his common devotion to democracy. His casual observation, "A worldwide regeneration cannot take place overnight," is an index to his temper. Again, he stressed the intellectual aspect of education more than other progressives. His purpose at all times, however, remained constant: to interpret present-day educational problems from the standpoint of pragmatic philosophy. His comments on education and democracy indicates his attitudes concerning them. What counts, in short, is not only the materials that are taught, but the spirit in which they are taught, the spirit that is made to pervade our educational system. A system is not democratic simply because it is made available to everybody or because it is administered without distinction of persons. In a Spartan scheme of education, all are included and all are treated equally, but it is not democratic because the individual is subordinated, is made a means to an end, and that end, the state. To be truly democratic, education must treat the individual himself as the end and set itself the task of preparing him for that intellectual and emotional sharing in the life and affairs of men which embodies the spirit of the Golden Rule. In proportion as common interests are permitted to outweigh special interests, the individual is becoming humanized, and the successive adjustments of life will be made in the direction of democracy and in accordance with the needs of an expanding life. This statement makes apparent that democracy and man's fulfillment therein is an article of faith, not a pragmatic philosophy. His concept of social man is, moreover, a moral concept, because to be social is to be moral. Most frequently, perhaps, the term social is applied to cooperative activities that are directed to a common end. In this sense, the Allies in the recent war were social in their relations to one another, but not in their relations to Germany. When used in this sense, the contrasting term is not non-social, but anti-social. But we are also inclined to describe the attitude of the sincere statesman or reformer as social because inspired by the desire to promote the well-being of others, even when those who are to be benefited resent what is being done in their behalf and unite against their would-be benefactor. That is, a man may be social, even though he stands all alone. He is called social not merely because his conduct has reference to the attitudes or activities of others, but because his conduct is the expression of a concern for the interests of others. Taken in this sense, social conduct is identical with moral conduct. Unless the word social is used with discrimination, it is bound to prove less serviceable as a means to insight than as a cover for our academic sins. The common element in these different meanings, it will be observed, consists in the fact that we learn the meaning of our environment by discovering what things mean to others. In 1904, H. Horne, quoting Everett, had declared, "The individual is not the universal, but it will be." Now, in Progressivism, the individual himself as the end, in Bode's words, had come into his own as the new universal by which all things are to be judged and in whom they have their being. This new universal, man, is moreover social man, against whom the purely individual or personal man dare not stand. Bode made the social reference always clear-cut. Education is a process of growth. It means a liberation of capacity. This growth is growth into social awareness and identity. Speaking generally, we may say that education is a matter of gaining an understanding of the meaning which the things in our environment have to the members of our community. Education must therefore be in terms of a social outlook. To repeat, the reconstruction of experience with reference to an ultimate standard of value is the outstanding concern of education. This concern or task is basic because democracy, as defined by pragmatic theory, is a challenge to every other system of belief and of education. However much progressivists protest that they're pragmatists, their essentially religious nature is apparent in terms of an ultimate standard of value. They assert a religious unity of belief as a challenge to every other system of belief and of education. Moreover, by denying the division of reality into a natural and a supernatural realm, and insisting that the world is all of one piece, they prepare the way not only for the radical unity of man, but for a radical totalitarianism. No law remains or any universal other than social man, before whom every private man must bow down and make obeisance. This great democracy cannot be identified with a particular form of government. When democracy is identified with established forms, it has ceased to be democracy. The letter killeth. It is the spirit that maketh alive. The essential thing, then, about democracy is its attitude. To identify democracy, as Bryce does, with the rule of the whole people expressing their sovereign will by their votes, is to invite the danger of accepting the form for the substance. Forms are important only insofar as they become a means for cultivating a democratic attitude. Since attitude is the essential thing, the private man is at the mercy of the new voices of the great God democracy whenever they choose to call his legal and formally democratic activity anti-social. Indeed, if he believes in anything, in heaven above or earth below, other than democracy, he is not truly democratic, for democracy requires that man think relatively, pragmatically and skeptically concerning all things save democracy. Democracy requires the same open-mindedness towards values or interests as science requires towards evidence. In this aspect, the spirit of science is the same as the spirit of democracy. There can be no final truth, and practical tests must be applied to questions of truth and conduct. Progressive education, by seeking to avoid quote-unquote compartmentalization in education and experience, was concerned with the restoration of a fundamental unity of learning and therefore of very great cultural importance. Bode, however, was not uncritical of progressive education. He even raised the question, is progressivism a new absolutism? He insisted that the individualism and absolutism of Rousseau was the source of such absolutism as existed in current progressivism. His cure was more democracy of Dewey's sort. A democratic program of education must necessarily rest on the perception that democracy is a challenge to all forms of absolutism, that it has its own standards, ideals, and values, and that these must pervade the entire program from end to end. How this new absolutism could itself end absolutism, we are not told. We are told that when some one set of values is arbitrarily selected as final and absolute, we have the principle of dictatorship. But this is only because such values are external to man. If things are seen as operational in value, then the true value, democratic or social man, can become the universal instead of some abstract value. Progressive education has a unique opportunity to become an avowed exponent of a democratic philosophy of life, which is the last remaining hope that the common man will eventually come into his own. In other words, Freedom and democracy mean liberation from all laws and standards external to man. Absolutism means subservience to any god or law external to man. In this scheme, private man, because of his individualism, reflects the absolutism of Rousseau. For Bode, democracy is more than a procedure. It is important to note that democracy, besides being a method, is also a faith or a creed or a theory of value or a social philosophy. Democracy means freedom from authoritarian values other than social man and his democracy. Authoritarianism places these values in the acceptance of certain habits for the guidance of belief and conduct. Democracy stresses the importance of keeping intelligence free for the continuous remaking of beliefs. The justification for this emphasis is the conviction that intelligence should function as a means of the abundant life and not as a means to the discovery of eternal and immutable truth. The choice, ultimately, is the basic one between democracy and traditional Christian theology. While Christianity has made some invaluable contributions to the spirit of democracy, these contributions belong to the historical past. Any attempt to establish morality or education on supernatural Christianity, or to put religion in the schools, would start us back on the road towards an evil past. It is an attempt to give the schools a fundamental philosophy or way of life, but, in actuality, promoting a way of life which competes with democracy. In effect, it is an invitation to democracy to commit suicide. Thus, the totalitarian democracy of progressive educators cannot tolerate Christianity because it is a rival religion. As totalitarian in nature, this democracy supplants all things in every area: art, economics, politics, athletics, and all else, with its own democratic interpretation, which is both total and totalitarian, and which usurps the total life of man and claims to be priest, prophet, and king in and over every sphere of human activity. As Bode himself stated it, we must face the fact that democracy in this modern world is no longer the simple concept that it was in earlier times, but that it involves the reconstruction of the whole mass of the traditional beliefs and attitudes and practices so as to become the basis for a distinctive way of life. Such reconstruction obviously becomes a primary obligation for education. Does the individual have no place in this scheme of things? Indeed he does, for Bode insisted that democracy stands or falls by its faith in the common man, and this faith alone is the basis on which it can undertake to remold this sorry scheme of things so as to make it conform more nearly to the heart's desire. Societies based on both common and uncommon man have alike collapsed. Wherein is this new common man different? Alfred H. Hall Quest, in his editorial foreword to Bode's Democracy as a Way of Life, declared, "In essence, democracy means the good life, and the good life is basically social and not individualistic. Freedom and equality involve an impartial distribution of the benefits for the assuring of which society exists." Others were soon to make very explicit that this democratic man, in whom we can alone believe, can only be this social or mass man who has been conditioned to socialism by education and thinks the proper social thoughts with respect to all things, for, as Bode warned us, democracy cannot be limited to man's politics, but has implications with respect to his economic, ethical, or religious beliefs. Democracy must signify a way of life, and hence cannot be limited to majority rule. It is a guiding principle for the formulation of national policy. How did Bode believe that such a scheme could avoid absolutism, dictatorship, or totalitarianism? His answer was an amazingly naive one. The issue can now be sharply drawn. If judgments of good and bad, of right and wrong, must be made in terms of an antecedent frame of reference in the sense of a fixed scheme or creed, then the principle of dictatorship is vindicated and democracy is plausible only because its basic absolutism is kept from view. The only liberty that is then permitted is liberty within the law as laid down by absolutism. On the other hand, if there is no absolute standard of judgment, then our judgments must be made in terms of participation in common interests, regardless of other considerations. Conduct on the part of communities or individuals must be evaluated with reference to its effects on promoting common interests among men. Liberty grows as the area of common interests is widened. Democracy then becomes identified with this principle of relativity as contrasted with the absolutism of dictatorships. There is no middle ground. No such end has any value except insofar as it increases our capacity for sharing in common concerns and thus contributes to human freedom. All creeds and social organizations are means to an end, and this end lies inside the process of living together and working together. Here is the same naive equation as in Dewey. Supernaturalism means dictatorship and presuppositions and laws cease to be antecedent, if natural. Because the divine process of Hegel has been fully naturalized by Dewey and Bode does not make it any less absolutist. Because all laws and standards are absorbed into the being of social or mass man does not thereby rule out the obvious fact that not only does an absolute remain, but it has grown all the more powerful by being equated with the caprice of social man and is thus an unlimited tyranny. Heretofore, in the American tradition, liberty has been defined in relation to a fundamental and higher law. Now it is no longer under law, but beyond law. Furthermore, the general will of this new mass man comes to focus not in himself per se, but in the school which then mediates it back to him. The school gives clarification to society. In other words, the school is peculiarly the institution in which democracy becomes conscious of itself. The Platonic guardians of this new society are thus the educators who, with becoming modesty, assume this determinative role in the name of that common or mass man who is refashioned according to the educator's proposed image.